What's up guys, this is Aphix and welcome back to part 2 of my Unreal Engine C++ tutorial. So in Unreal Engine you're going to be a lot of the time using data types that you're not familiar with. For instance, like AS character, or actually more directly the A character class, and you're going to have to be using all these different subclasses in Unreal Engine. So what you want to do is you want to kind of get familiar with the different types of components and their names, and probably in the blueprint editor is the best way to go. And let's go to our p-test map, and in our blueprints folder let's open up the BP player pawn. So you can see you can add all these components, right? And what you guys should do, like spend time doing, is look at all these components, and all of these are codable in C++ instead of adding them here. And if you go to your, let's just grab one of these, you can see, here these basic shapes, they actually are static mesh components, so I would not recommend doing that. But for instance, take a box collision. Now if we want to make a box collision in C++, all we would do is, remember, you always have to forward declare the class. So class uBox collision, or uBox component, and note that for the collision components in Unreal Engine are not called uBox collision component, it's box component or sphere component. And this here, this is the U, it's in front of the box component. U stands for uObject, which means that the box component isn't an actor. You don't have to worry about this right now. All you need to know is that all the components will be starting off with a U. So here we can make a new instance of a uBox component. And remember, we always use pointers, and I'll just call it box collision. And you can end that with a semicolon, and then above that let's expose it to the editor with U property with edit defaults only. And what this lets us do is it lets us edit this in the editor. And what blueprint read only does is it lets us actually mess with it in blueprints and get values from it in blueprints. So we're just doing this to test it out. We're not actually gonna keep this. I just want you guys to see how this how these data types kind of work. Now I'll just grab another one that we could just guess the name. So if we go here, let's see, like if we have an arrow, we could just call it a U arrow component, and you see it works right there. It's called arrow. You just add the U in the component, and it's good to get familiar with some methods here that you can be used with these data types. So I'm going to get rid of our box collision code since we don't need it. And over in the scharacter.cpp, let's take a look at some of the most common mesh, skeletal mesh methods. So I'm just going to make a function called testfunc because I don't want to mess with any of our pre-made code. I'm just going to call it testfunc, and inside it'll just be completely empty. And then remember, the wine bottle should appear when you hover over it. For me it's not appearing, so I'm just going to create my implementation of Visual Assist. So what we can put in testfunc, I'm just going to show you some methods. So one of the most common methods is getMesh, and remember, getMesh gets the mesh because characters have pre-built in already a mesh. Now if I take a look at the source code, you can't actually directly reference this mesh, because if you go to that, it's actually under the private section. And this is all just engine code. You can see you will be able to understand this at some point, so don't worry. And in scharacter.cpp, there's this function getMesh and then set skeletal mesh. So you can't just do like getMesh equals and then set it to a mesh reference. That's just gonna break everything, because since mesh is a pointer, when you're setting it to a different mesh pointer, you're basically just completely changing like what it's referencing, so it just messes everything up. And then here you could just put in the skeletal mesh template, and then yeah, so if we made something here like a variable, use skeletal mesh star mesh to switch to, then what happens, we could actually put this in the set skeletal mesh to switch to. Now we're not actually going to do this. I'm just going to leave it like this so that you guys see how it works. And note, you're not going to be able to actually access this in the editor. Like here you saw we're able to access our camera component. We won't be able to access this skeletal mesh. And note also that this isn't a skeletal mesh component, it's just a skeletal mesh. And what variables like this do, and they're not components, they actually appear like here on the right. And you remember you have to click on the actual name and the parent of all of these components to get these variables. So let's actually test something, and I'm gonna add a U property here on the mesh to switch to. And in parentheses, I'm just gonna write edit defaults only so we can edit it, and click Control S. Note that you can overexpose things to Blueprint or to the Unreal editor, so it's better. I know we're not going to have to access this mesh in Blueprints, so it's better just to keep it edit defaults only and not Blueprint read only. So over here, you guys are probably familiar with arrays of some sort, and in Unreal Engine we use a template, and it's just called the T array. And note that it's prefixed by T, which means that it's a template. So here, let's make an array of meshes. So T array, and that's what it does. There's also T map and a T dictionary, I think. Is that? No, that's not it. Oh no, T map is the dictionary, and then there should be more. I'm not going to go over them since they're usually not used in game dev, or for my purposes at least. So yeah. And remember, since it's a function or a template, we have to have the angular brackets. And inside, I'm just going to do skeletal mesh. And then remember, it has to be pointers, and then brackets. And then we'll just call this array of meshes. And then let's expose that once again. U property. And let's do edit defaults only. Remember, don't do Blueprint only, since that overexposes and we don't need to access this in Blueprints. So we've done a good amount of just adding stuff, and we haven't yet seen what it does in the Blueprint and Unreal Engine editor. So let's actually do that really quick. And before we do that, I want to show you something cool about functions, is that you can actually set them to U function. And U function, just like U property, allows you to expose to blueprints and such. So let's actually just make this a blueprint callable. So yeah, that means we can call it in Blueprints, and I'll show you what I mean more on that. And you can also notice that here there's the U class, and these are just macros that kind of help you make more efficient classes and pre-made code that's really useful to you in the future. It also allows you to access certain things like JSON. For instance, you have to mark only variables marked with a U property can actually be JSON serialized in the editor. And I'll explain that more in the future. So let's go back to our Unreal Engine editor, and let's compile our code. And I will see you when the compilation is done. So once your code has finished compiling, like mine has, you can go over to the BP player pawn, and you can see up here under S character is mesh to switch to and the array of meshes, and you can see here, there they are. Now, if I got rid of the U property on one of them, once again, it wouldn't appear in the side. So if I got rid of the U property for mesh to switch to like that, and then I recompiled, then this would be gone. And actually, if we called test func while the mesh to switch to is null, your engine is going to crash. So a better thing to do here in test func would be if mesh to switch to. And if mesh to switch to, then we will do get mesh and set skeletal mesh. Then go back to scharacter.h, and let's make that U property go back. We don't have to recompile since I'm planning on setting mesh to switch to, but remember to do it since it's important, and if you don't, your engine will crash. So over here in the mesh to switch to, you can see we could choose any of these meshes we have. I'm going to choose tutorial TPP and an array of meshes. I just wanted to see how the structure of arrays work in Unreal Engine. So you can just click plus, and then you can choose all the meshes, and you see it actually sets them to what you're choosing. And let's implement our test func. So you're gonna see over here in our Visual Studio, we have move right. And if we try calling move right in our blueprint, so you just right click to do an action and you type in move right, you can see we do have the axis value and the axis event, like right here, but that's just calling the input. So over here, and actually this is a better use of it. Let me see if I could get it. Okay, so there's not really functions that so well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that here, so when we do move right, this function isn't both of these functions aren't what we have in our Visual Studio. In our Visual Studio we have float val, and one of the most noticing things is that the parameter isn't the same, and you can see it says axis value and it's an input, which basically means it's just calling, it's when our input is called. So we can't access our C++ functions from Blueprint, and that sometimes is a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, and in most cases it's not necessary. But if we have to do something that we don't know how to do in C++ or is easier in Blueprints, like just quicker, then we can implement our own functions using this U function that I showed you guys earlier. So blueprint callable. So sometimes also in the UI, since UI is all blueprints, we might want to call a function that's in our character that's in C++. And once again, we'd have to make it blueprint callable. And see, look at this, we can an event begin play, or let's do tick, or no, let's do a begin play. Tick is a little taxing, and you could drag off of that and do test func, and you can see it appears. So you just click enter if it's the first highlighted thing. And let's see if that actually works. So compile and save all, go to test map, click play, and you can see it does set our skeletal mesh, which is really cool. And if I went here and went to player pawn and switched this tutorial TPP to skeletal cube and compiled, then I play it, you can see that now I am this cube. And this is one of the most useful things. You can see that we have implemented a test func in C++ that gets a mesh that we actually set in blueprints, and then we actually set the mesh in the blueprint begin play, which is really, it's allows like a great unity between blueprints and C++, and if you can use them together really nicely like this, you'll get the best game that you can make. So I'm going to click Ctrl+Shift+S to save all, and let's learn a few more data types. So there's also U camera. So I will make a U camera, and it's not a U camera component, it's just U camera. And I think it's actually a camera, since it's camera actor. Yeah, a camera actor. Let's actually not do this one. It's better not to. And I'm actually going to show you things in the camera component. So we already have camera comp. So in test function, remember you always have to check if this variable is not null before you actually access it. So it just if camera comp, and then in brackets, and that makes sure that camera component is actually set, which also saves you from engine crashes. And if camera comp, and I'm going to show you something cool. If you go to the editor and click on your camera component, everything in this details panel can actually be accessed through C++. So here, let's look at field of view. So let's do field of view. And then you can see there's a method called set field of view, and we can set field of view to anything we want. Let's just do something extremely drastic so we can see the change. And then let's compile. And the cool thing is you can access, like, in any of these variables, since you coded them in C++, you can access all of these attributes in C++. And I don't think they're attributes, they're more variables. So for instance here, if we can go to the constructor, and we could do something like get mesh, and then arrow, and then let's go look at the mesh again, and you see there's this section called disable clause simulation. So let's see if there's actually a function disable. Yeah, so b disable clause simulation, and that's actually the variable here. So if I set this here, then basically this would basically be in C++ equivalent would be setting this to true. And let me actually check to see if this is a private variable. And it is public, so we can access it like this. And we just save that, and I'm just gonna keep it like that so you see that it does change in here. And let's compile, save all. And let's play. Let's see if our camera field of view works, and it does. So this does look a little crazy, but what you can see here is that what we did in test func is once again being called on camera component, and it's setting the field of view. Now you could spend hours just exploring these useful functions, and they're really good. And you can also spend hours exploring any part of Unreal Engine, and the most useful part I'd say to learn would be just what's necessary to make your game. So for instance, if you need to have a game where you have to disable cloth simulation, then it's good to learn about this attribute rather than something like set skeletal mesh, especially if you don't even need to set the skeletal mesh. So it's better to study what you need rather than what is there. So let's go back to the editor and click compile. And I want to compile to see if this be disabled cloth simulation changes. Go to player pawn and then go to the mesh. Again, you can see that disabled cloth simulation is set to true in both of them. And if I make it not true, it says that, hey, this is not the default, so it's asking if you want to change it back, and you can click that yellow arrow, and once again it changes it to the default, which is in C++ right here. So I hope you guys learned a lot from today's video. Next video we will probably be discussing stuff such as the macros, including U properties, U enums, different attributes that you can use in there. And we'll also be discussing how structs and enumerations work in Unreal Engine, including having to convert enums to bytes, which I'll discuss later on. And we also may have time to discuss certain parts of the editor that you guys might not know about, including the function graph, or not function graph, it's called the event graph, and there's different functions and function overriding, and we'll moreover just go over how the editor looks like and the layout of it. So once again, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please stay tuned and please subscribe and like, and I'll see you in the next video.